Welcome to The Walls Within, the mental journey to elite performance. In this podcast, we're going to explore elite performance from the cognitive perspective. We're going to talk about how we think about things, how our brain works, how we hold up to the stress and pressures of demanding environments. Can we climb the obstacles in front of us and continue on the path, or will we succumb to the negativity surrounding potential failure? Thank you for joining us on this first episode. My name is Dave Paolillo, and I'm joined today by a 14-year NHL veteran goaltender, a two-time Stanley Cup champion, Curtis McElhinney. Curtis, thanks for joining
Yeah,
me.
Dave, thanks for being here. And let's get into it with how this really all came about. And for myself personally, having recently retired from hockey, I went into the off season after being a part of the second Stanley Cup winning team, and thought that I could prolong my career for potentially one more year. And it's a funny thing how free agency works, and here we are on July 13th. It's free agency day, and when everyone signs, and I'm not gonna lie, I have like a little bit of anxiety, even though I'm not a part of that anymore. So last year, what happened was I went into free agency trying to drag the career out for one more year, and usually on day one or day two, all the spots are taken, and it's just a free for all. There's you know conversations that take place beforehand, but everything is done if you have a spot within the first couple of days. So there were limited conversations, and then all of a sudden everybody had signed, they'd taken their spots, they'd filled those needs that each organization had. And then there's this like 2 week gap where everybody just kind of like takes a break from the flurry and goes on vacation, which is bizarre to me. You'd think that you'd just want to plug all the holes for your team, but no, everybody takes a 2 week break, and then they come back and they start making more phone calls. And then all of a sudden the conversations were no longer about playing. They transitioned into this, hey, would you be interested in being a minor league goalie coach and being a part of the organization in that regard? And it was the most bizarre conversation, because you don't really know what to say when your expectations are to continue playing something that you've done for so long, and then to just be floored and
Yeah.
say, hey, we'd love to have you, but not as a player anymore. It's, we need you in a coaching capacity, which is an that's a tremendous like call to get as well. They're saying that, hey, we value what you bring to an organization, it's just no longer on the ice. And it kind of blindsided me a little bit, and it was flattering to get the calls, but it was comical in the sense that I was sitting there on those phone calls being like, I think I just got retired and I didn't even know about it. And I I was trying to come to terms with it while sitting on the phone with some of these organizations, and it was a lot to process. I'm not gonna lie. It like I said, it floored me. I was a little bit shocked by it, but yeah, I was retired with without my consent, which is fine. That's professional sports, and how that world works. But then it was all about turning the page, and for myself, I've got two young kids. I wasn't really prepared to move into that role, to continue moving around in regards to coaching, even though I wanted to be a part of an organization. It's not the right fit at this point for me and where I'm at in my life. So it was all about, how do I process this? How do I move on? And what's the next step? Because a lot of times, for the most part in life, you get a little bit of time to plan things. There are things that kind of just creep up on you and catch you off guard. I knew the end was near. I can't say I was fully prepared to transition into a life after hockey. Certainly, I've got time on my side, which is a luxury. I'm still considerably young. I'm only 39 right now, which is nothing in the grand scheme of things. But so there's a lot of life ahead, I hope. Knock on wood there. Um, but it was about finding ways to process that whole experience. And for me, social media has kind of been one of those things where it's a little bit of a love hate relationship, right? It's this wonderful platform where you can use your voice, and really anyone can share whatever they want on there. And the benefit of that is you can share your message in a positive light. You also have to deal with the people who choose to be negative on platforms such as that. And so for me, it was about sharing experiences over that 16-year career, and things that were really good, and also things that were not so good. And it's a behind the scenes look of what transpired over all those years, a lot of it was very positive. I'm fortunate. I'm blessed. I made the NHL. I got to play there for a number of years and be a part of that. And I'm very grateful for that experience. But there were a lot of things that took place throughout those years that were not the most positive experience. And the whole concept of this podcast is about sharing experiences, finding ways to
Right.
overcome them or to find ways to process them and to cope, to learn, and to continue to grow. And that's kind of the main emphasis of what we hope to accomplish with this. But yeah, it was and that's really how we got in touch. And you started commenting on some of the posts that I had made, and there were a lot of similarities for you, and we'll get into that in a few minutes here. But it was one of those things where when someone makes a comment and it's positive, you take note of it. It's
Right.
it's an interesting way to connect on social media because it's easy to see the negative, but I choose to kind of focus on the positive things that occur. And you were one of those kind of bright lights that really jumped off the page and caught my attention. And that's kind of how we hit it off. And before you knew it,
You bet.
I started getting to know you a little bit and talking to you about your career and how you came to be where you are. And it was just one of those things where, for me, when someone says I fly in the Air Force, I fly F-35s, I'm thinking, well, playing in the NHL is not that cool compared to that, because that is probably one of the most incredible things that I've ever heard of. And for me, I'm like, wow, that's I can't imagine. I can't imagine being in your shoes, being there and being in that environment, and you and I both having similar experiences, even though we come from
Right.
vastly different backgrounds. So, um, yeah, without further ado, I mean, I would love for you to kind of just give everybody a rundown of your career, how you came to be where you are, how we connected a little bit, and some of the things that we're going to talk about as we move forward
Absolutely.
with this.
Well, thanks, Curtis, and I'm humbled to be doing this with you because of course, I grew up a gigantic hockey fan, so to be able to talk to you and share these kind of stories with everybody listening is pretty humbling. So, thanks for that. And I would say, to be clear to people listening, talk about you for another second here. You wanted to keep playing. I mean, you wanted to be in the league and keep playing this season. And I think had you been doing that, we wouldn't be having this podcast because you'd be busy. Busy in the off season, getting ready for training camp here coming on October. It comes fast, and so this opportunity happened because of an adversity that you faced, which was not getting to play one more year. And I think it's safe to say that adversity has been probably a part of your lexicon and overcoming that your whole career. Is that pretty fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we really look at it, we're trying to find the silver lining in all these situations that we encounter.
Absolutely.
And um, for me, it was, hey, retirement comes up. What's the next step? You and I start communicating, and then all of a
Yep.
sudden, there's an opportunity to share experiences and to share stories. And you're currently still active right now, which is the incredible part of it, is that you're sharing similar experiences to ones that I encountered over all those 16 years. And for me, it was a lot of them were bottled up at the time. Very
Yeah.
stubborn personality. I tend to just kind of internalize things, be overly protective, and you don't really want to give anything away. And that's the
Well, that
challenging part of playing in those environments and having a career and where you think everyone's looking at you and trying to find some little chink in that armor that's going to give something away. And
that's a great segue because I've experienced that and dealt with that my whole life as well. And you talk about the chink in the armor, and we're all fallible people, and I've had a lot of those breaks, a lot of those hiccups, and it started out, pretty uneventful all the way through high school for me. I knew, much like you, I knew ever since I was a little kid what I was going to go do. I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and here I am, having achieved that at the ripe old age of 45. Uh, Again, facing the end of my career, facing that decision to prioritize other things in my life. And I think um, when anybody gets to the 19-year point on active duty, they're automatically faced with those challenges of what's next, right? Um, and and so here I am in high school. I'm taking the steps that I need to become a fighter pilot, but I had to set small goals, and the first goal was getting into a university that I thought was going to be the quickest step, or the I won't say easiest, but the most probable step to becoming a fighter pilot, and that was going to the Air Force Academy. So I put all my eggs in that basket. I knew that that's where I wanted to go to school, and I made no bones about telling everybody, all my guidance counselors and everything, that's what I wanted to do. But I went to a pretty small school in Florida, and 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 so I knew I may not be competitive as some people from some bigger communities and bigger cities and stuff. So I applied and got some ROTC scholarships, but I didn't get an appointment right away to the academy. And what I got was an offer to do a year of prep school at a civilian university, also private military school. So I went up to college at Valley Forge Military College in Pennsylvania, which is a private military school, and then I was cross enrolled at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, and that was kind of my first taste of adversity. Right, I wanted to go to the academy first shot. I didn't get in, and so I ended. Okay, I got to take this other step. So I went up there, tried to be as successful as possible, but I don't think I think I was average. My performance was average. Looking back, I don't think I wasn't a rock star, and I've never been, and I've had to grapple with that as well. Um, when you do really well in a small high school, you're a big fish in a small sea. But then when you get cast out among the other high performing people in your peer group, you find out real quick that you're a real small fish in a big sea. And so I dealt with that and grappled with that. So a year goes by, I reapply to the academy, and I get into the Air Force Academy. And from day one, again, militarily, I was strong. I had that year of military training, and I had a mindset that I knew I wanted to be I knew I wanted to be in the military and be an officer and serve my country. And so I would say from the beginning at the Air Force Academy, it was pretty clear that I was a really small fish in a really big sea of talented people, and a lot of those people had everything squared away, and they didn't have a lot of chinks in the armor, and their fallibility was much more hidden, and so I started to develop a clear sense that I may not belong here. I wanted to be there. I knew I wanted to graduate, but it was a struggle. I really didn't do that great, and I faced a lot of setbacks. And every time I picked myself up, there was another setback, um, and so I started to really feel, am I cut out for this? Is this something that I can do? And I wasn't willing to quit, so I stuck with it. And what wound up happening is I found myself in this downward spiral of depression and anxiety that I couldn't control, because I felt like an imposter. I felt like I didn't belong there, but deep down I kind of knew I did because of what my goal was. But that small goal of graduating from the academy and getting a pilot slot was getting further and further away with every setback that I faced. And it got to the point where I could no longer function. Anxiety overcame me, the depression overcame me, and I was just doing worse and worse. So one of the senior leaders out there stepped in, said, "Hey, do you still want to do this? Do you want to be an officer in the Air Force?" I said, "Absolutely." So I went home for a year of convalescent leave, which is kind of unheard of. And most people listening, if they're familiar with the academy program, it'll probably surprise you to know that from time to time there are folks that get approved to go on a leave of sabbatical for myriad reasons. And so I did. And I had one semester left, and I went back and busted my shoulder on the incoming PT test. So dislocated my shoulder. It was pretty clear that with one semester to go, I got hurt because of previous injuries of doing some stupid things that we'll probably talk about later in the podcast. And again, it was priorities and balance, and I was kind of all over the place. And so on that PT test, it was clear that I couldn't complete it because my shoulder was out of socket. They wouldn't help me put it back in, and they're like, "No, you got to go to the doctor." Well, one of the contingencies of me going back to the academy was passing that thing, so I didn't. So they said, "Okay, what now?" So they elected to give me the opportunity to stay for an extra semester, and they fixed my shoulder with surgery, and it was a great surgery. And it just took me longer than they gave me initially to rehab it. And here I am, 9 days away from graduating, and I find out that I was going to be disenrolled from the Air Force Academy because on the final post rehab PT test, I didn't do enough push ups. So for push ups, all of that work and that effort and that mental anguish of trying to meet the standards, I couldn't meet the standard, and I got kicked out. And I was called back to active duty as a senior airman to pay back the cost to the taxpayer of my education out there. And and again, another blow, another huge setback in my path and my goal, which was first to get a commission as an officer in the Air Force to serve my country and ultimately become a fighter pilot. And so, because of the previous diagnosis and all the help that I needed to get through some of those dark times, my medical record just got thicker and thicker. Um, and here I am now staring down the opportunity to serve my country as an enlisted member, which is not the way to become a fighter pilot. And so I made the decision to appeal that all the way up to the Secretary of the Air Force. And looking back on it, it's crazy. It's crazy. I smile because I think about how did I get through that as a 20 something kid. And I will tell you that the rock in my life was my family, my mom and dad and my brother and my extended family. 100% supportive of me, and so I started the process of appealing the decision simply because I knew that I was worth it, and it was really hard having shown all these chinks in the armor that I was worth it, that I was worth betting on. And there were a few people that bet on me, a few people that were in my corner that knew me and knew that I would be a stalwart, and that I was a stubborn person, and that I was set on becoming an officer. And so, in the process of that appeal, I spent a year living in Breckenridge, Colorado, teaching skiing. It was incredibly therapeutic for me, and it allowed me to kind of refocus my life on priorities and kind of put me in a good headspace. And the appeal was granted. I was offered the opportunity to go to a civilian college and do a 1 year ROTC program and get a commission through that route before I was called back to be an airman. So I had a deadline, and so I had to put my tail between my legs and walk up to a to the to the lead colonel in charge of an ROTC detachment and ask him if I could join his detachment and get a commission in a year, and tell him that I had just gotten kicked out of the Air Force Academy. Well, that was humbling, and that was not an easy conversation for me. And here he is, doesn't know me from anybody else, and all he knows is my background, and I'm asking him to let me in. And it took some convincing. He didn't want to at first, and I had somebody in my corner down at the academy that made a call on my behalf and convinced him that I was probably worth taking a bet on, and he bet on me. And that started the process of me finishing my college degree, graduating from an ROTC program, and getting my commission. And ultimately, that happened and came to fruition in in June of 2003. I met the deadline that the Air Force had set for me to serve my active duty service commitment for the academy at the same time as my ROTC service commitment, and then off I went as a lieutenant maintenance officer. And I started my career as a maintenance officer. And the interesting part is, I still wanted to fly after all that. I knew that I wanted to fly. I spent 8 years in college with 240 undergrad hours and one bachelor's degree. No kidding. And so,
It's incredible.
so I
Like,
show up.
and I don't want to stop your story right now because we will
No, you're good.
continue to dive into this thing. But you know, the parallels between us are just eerily similar. And, one of my favorite things that you talk about is the fact that you knew what you wanted to do from a young age. And, that's the best part about being a kid is you have a big imagination and you dream
Yeah,
big and you see something that you're like, this is incredibly cool. And that's exactly what I want to be. And, a lot of times we'll lose that creativity and that imagination as we get older. But, you know, you, you accomplished what you set out to do from the start. And I was similar. And the path to that point was, you know, it just felt like you were from going from one wall to the next and constantly running into things. And it was all about finding ways to get through that, to overcome it, to cope with it, to deal with it. And, there's two things that I love about your story is one, you're blessed with a family who supports you to no end, and they will always be there for you. And that's what you and I both are trying to accomplish with our own families these days.
that's right.
And two, somebody went to bat for you. They saw that you were having a hard time, that you were running into obstacles that maybe they just felt almost too much to overcome, and they picked you up and they helped you out, and they said, because of these experiences and because of what you're going through, you are going to come out on the other end and you are going to be stronger, better because of all of this. And that's not to say that once you achieve these or you overcome these obstacles that it's all going to be peachy keen after that. No, 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 no. Like, this is just an ongoing thing. This is part of life. And,
That's
here
right.
you are staring down the end of your career and you'll be transitioning into something else. And we're both very similar in that regard. And it's the next step. And the next step will also come with obstacles too. And, through the experiences that you and I have both had, we are better prepared to handle those. But there are still going to be things that creep up on us that we did not see coming. And that's what I love about it.
Absolutely.
That it's almost the challenge of running into those obstacles and knowing that you have inside of you the ability to overcome them. And it's not just you overcoming it. It's you need a support group, and you need good friends, you need family, and you need probably colleagues and other people in your life that are going to help you kind of find ways to get through some of these issues. And the biggest thing for me is expressing the issue when you feel it coming, and it's really hard to
Yes.
identify. There's a lot
Yes.
of times where you're going through something and you don't even entirely fully comprehend what it is you're going through. And I think it's so critical, and this is the number one issue with mental health is the ability to talk to it. And as we know, there are many different levels on the scale of mental health, so we don't want to peg it all into just one thing. And because really there's a lot of times it's easy to internalize it. Here you are,
Yeah.
you're just constantly, at least in my case, I have conversations in my head all day nonstop, and they are not always pleasant. And the things that I'm
Yes.
telling myself in my mind are probably not the most conducive things to finding ways to get through that. And I think that's the issue, where you try and bring in somebody else or you try and have conversations with somebody else, and they can kind of help walk you through that, whether that's a professional, family, friend, colleague, whomever. It's so critical to have conversations, to talk to people, to really, because it's hard to do it on your own, and it takes
Yeah.
a heck
My
of a lot
my
longer.
demise my demise early on was the thought that one, if I talk about the weakness that I'm feeling and I talk about the things that are the most guarded, that it's going to show people how terrible I am. And so I bottled it up. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to let those out because I'm going to fake it till I make it. Well, guess what? The bottom just about dropped out
Mhm.
in my life. And it took all of this adversity, all these walls that I faced early on to realize how vitally important it is to find somebody, as you just mentioned, that you can talk to. And I think part of why I went through all the things that I went through um, was so that I could learn that because I didn't have it doped out as a young person in my 20s. And it took going through all that to kind of open my eyes and go, okay, you're not you're not ready. You're not ready. And I tried to meet the standards that were set. The standards were clear, and it was really hard for people to believe in me when I wasn't meeting the standards. And so I don't blame the system what happened. I don't blame anybody except myself. Now, some of it was circumstantial, but some of it was based on my decisions and things that I did and things that I misprioritized. And so there's really no question um, with that. But coming full circle to experiencing that, now here you and I are, and we're doing a podcast. And some people may listen to this and go, what are these two geezers rambling about? Nobody really, we're not going to talk about how to become a fighter pilot. We're not going to tell people, hey, here's what you need to do to become an NHL goaltender. Because I don't think you and I could tell our story, but I don't know that our advice would work for everybody. I
Right.
mean, it
And
certainly wouldn't based on our stories. And so, what are we doing? I think what you and I are doing is we're taking our experiences, we're talking about those walls that we faced, and we're going to bring some interesting people in future episodes. But we're gonna talk about that as a way of taking our story and hoping that others can learn from it and see two people up here that have the jobs that we have and go, okay, wow, here's a fighter pilot and an NHL goalie with two Stanley Cup rings, and they're talking about all their weaknesses and all the things that they faced to get where they were. It didn't come easy, and so I think that's really important for people to understand, and that everybody has a story like that, and only a select, very very lucky, very very blessed few people will skate through a career like mine or yours with no adversity or with little adversity, and so that's just not reality. But so many people, all they see is the poster, all they see is the pretty ribbon tied on the Instagram or the Facebook page or the Twitter feed or the media article that shows how perfect people are, and the fact of the matter is it's just not reality. And so there I was as a maintenance officer, and I wanted to still fly, and so I applied to 3 active duty boards. I eventually got my medical fitness cleared to be able to um, be determined safe in an airplane. And at 30 years old, which is probably about 6 to 7 years later than most people, I showed up to pilot training as a 30-year-old captain. As a pretty old, long in the tooth guy, older than a lot of the instructors, and um, able to share those experiences that I faced with younger students in my class facing adversity. And there's some stories there too of some of the adversity that we faced in my UPT class very early on. And I can talk more about it later, but we lost a student and an instructor in an aircraft accident. And some of the adversity that I faced early on helped me rally around the class and get everybody through that. And it was a real difficult time. And so I've experienced things like that throughout my career where I've taken those lessons that I've learned and I've tried to bring those to other people and simply just tell my story to go, hey, look, you're not alone. There's other people that are going through these times like you may be. And while not exactly the same, the feelings are the same. The feelings of self-loathing, the feelings of depression, the feelings of anxiety, these manifestations of apprehension, fear of failure, all these things, imposter syndrome, all these terms we'll throw out there, and neither you nor I are mental health experts, but we are subject matter experts of our lives and what we felt and experienced in that. So,
yeah, it's
you know what I mean?
it's really one of those things that we're both in positions now, and one of the most rewarding things I think you would agree as well for both of us was the fact that the value that we brought to the organizations that we were a part of was one, obviously, in performing a job or a task that was required of us. But for me, the most rewarding part was being able to have conversations with people to share experiences to help them see maybe the bigger picture and to kind of walk through that step by step. And when you get some feedback or you have negative experiences, to know that there's somebody, in my instance, in that locker room whom you can have conversations with that has maybe gone through something similar. And for you, obviously, you have other officers who are experiencing some of the same challenges that you went through early in your career. And there you are, being someone that's experienced them, you can kind of recognize some of those signs. And if there's not necessarily outward signs, you can still approach people and just check in with them. Hey, is everything good? Everything going all right? Anything I can help you with? And it's such a critical question to ask. And it's not one of those things where you're prying or you're digging. Yeah, it's really about the experiences that we have gained over all these years. And as I was mentioning, the most rewarding part is when you're in that locker room is, how do I add value to not only my personal performance? That's, we're always trying to own that craft and become the best that we can be. Um, but how do I improve the 21 other guys in this locker room? How do I help coaching staff? How do I help management? What value can I bring? And a lot of it for me is through shared experiences, through conversations, and talking to um, for our careers, they're mostly kids, what we would consider young kids. They're in their early 20s. They're fresh out of junior hockey or college hockey, and they come in wide-eyed. You're making terrific money. Um, and for the most part, they've really never had any obstacles to overcome. They've always been the best at their level, and that's the reason that they make that jump into the NHL, is they were elite at their level that they were previously playing at. But then all of a sudden, when you get to the NHL, what happens is, and it was the same for me, my role went from being the guy to, hey, you're the secondary guy, and we only need you to do spot duty here and there. And when you get in there, just make sure you don't screw up. Well, how that's received by a lot of kids is different. The cool thing about teams, any team sport, is everybody's got a role to fill, and how they plug into that specific role is up to them. And the organization's job, and the people that are put in those leadership roles, it's their job to determine who should fit where and how this team is going to come together. And they need certain players. Well, they need everybody really to buy in. So it's challenging when you've been the guy and then all of a sudden you're told, we need you in a third, fourth line role. You're our seventh, eighth defenseman, or you're our backup goalie. And you need to come to terms with that, and you need to be able to accept that and find a way to thrive in that position. And that can be a lot for especially younger players to try and comprehend. And it took me a long time to really buy into the role and to get comfortable in that position. And then once it became a part of me, I accepted that fate. And the next step was making sure, it's like, how do I excel in this position? How do I become the best that I can be in this position? And how do I help other people, whether that's accepting their role on the team, whether that's becoming the best that they can be in that job. It was all about the value play. And there's something to be said for those individuals who may not be at the top, may not be the starting goalie, may not be the top line player, but they're kind of the behind the scenes. And there are many of them, don't get me wrong, but I will say that it can be a very challenging thing to accept when all you've known is, hey, you were the top guy and you want to continue that role.
And that's exactly the point in all of this, is those walls that come up, and the wall of being faced with, I'm not a starter in the NHL, or did I just get retired? I mean, that story, we smile just because of the way you say it. It's just, it's crazy. A lot of people listening may not have known that it wasn't Curtis McElhaney's decision to retire from the NHL, and everybody sees, that's, and
No, but
sure.
that's professional sports. Like, that's the beauty of it. And that's what, when you work in an elite profession, you necessarily don't get to make all the choices. We all have a grand plan. You had a plan when you were growing up of becoming a fighter pilot, and you accomplished that. But when we look at the bigger picture, there were many hurdles for you to overcome, and you ran into a lot of walls. And I'm sure at a lot of times, like I did, you didn't really feel like pushing through that. It felt like this is becoming too much. I'm not sure it's worth it. But, and I'm on the second side of that career and I've moved on. And now that I have time to reflect on things and look back, I go, heck yeah, it was worth it. Was it how I drew it up? No, definitely not. I was supposed to be the number one guy. I'd have 5 Stanley Cup rings and I would have been the guy standing in the net, when the team comes out to celebrate and everybody jumps on that guy. But that's not how it works out sometimes in life. And, I think the important thing was finding a way. It's like, I still accomplished the goal that I set out to accomplish. It's like shoot for the moon and land around the stars or something like that, right? You have big aspirations, you dream big, but life's going to throw you curveballs. And that's really the beauty of it all. So,
You
um,
bet. So where are we going? What's next for the podcast, Curtis?
yeah, absolutely. It's about one, we're going to share all these stories that you and I have both encountered. And the second objective is going to be to bring in third parties who will share, probably with a little more background than you and I, um, issues such as mental health, elite performance, and we're going to try and grab people from all walks of life. This is not something that's just going to focus exclusively on hockey or being a fighter pilot. It's important to understand that these issues are prevalent across all walks of life.
Absolutely.
And we will really dive into elite performance because you and I are both geeking out about certain
Right.
things there. It's always about tweaking things and finding ways to accomplish and become better at your job. And there are a multitude of people out there that I'm sure we haven't encountered yet, but we are definitely going to track them down and try and get them on this podcast to share the experiences and the things that they know that can hopefully help us as we move forward into our careers and other people as they go through certain things as well.
Absolutely. So to tie it back, right? So the walls within, everybody has them, and elite performance is it's so much in so many careers, and to be able to talk about obstacles and how to overcome them and the skills and the things that people are leveraging without even realizing it, and then potentially you and I being able to research and find those articles and those things that talk about what's actually going on in the brain and be able to talk about it. I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do. So maybe we can call this a self-help podcast. Maybe we can just call it a podcast with some cool stories and some cool guests talking about adversity. And if folks find strength just knowing that they're not alone, and hearing people that they may have thought, oh, everything is going swimmingly for them, but after they showed up on that podcast, it sounds like not. And it, it's just increasing awareness, and also letting people know that it's okay to talk about what you've got going on. And I think that's, to wrap it up, that's what I think the whole point of this is. And so lots of growth potential. We're working on a website. We'll get that up and going too. And we'll end with this. The views on this podcast are our personal stories. They certainly aren't the views of the United States government. They're not the views of the NHLPA or the NHL. There are stories, and so they should be taken as such. And some of the stuff can get deep and can get heavy, and I think it's important that everybody understand that. And with that, Curtis, any parting shots?
Yeah, Dave, thanks for joining me today. Super excited to kind of move forward and see some of the adventures that we'll continue to have on this podcast and in our own lives, and um, learn about some incredible things that you and I, I'm sure, have not encountered yet or we're not even fully aware of. So it's going to be great. I'm really excited and looking forward to it.
Thanks. We'll see everybody next time.